Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Brooke Mitchell, and today's webinar is Monarchs in Motion, film premiere and Q&A with student filmmaker Mason Mirabile, along with featured guest and NatHab expedition leader Charlie Reinertsen. Mason, Charlie, thank you both so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having us.
All right, let's get into the film, everyone. This might take a second to load, so just bear with me one moment.
Enter the magical world of monarch butterflies. Our journey shows this persistent creature as fragile as it is resilient.
Monarch butterflies are incredibly unique in that in the butterfly world, in the family of Lepidoptera, they are one of the very few that have a migration. And not only do they have a migration, but they have a migration that extends thousands of miles, as far as southern Canada, all the way down to their wintering grounds in Mexico. And the longest path of that migration is roughly 2,500 miles.
These wintering grounds in Michoacan, Mexico, are not just a refuge for the monarchs, but an example of why it's important we continue to help the environment.
World Wildlife Fund has been working in the conservation of the migratory monarch butterfly for many, many years. And in 2000, with scientific information, was able to help the Mexican government to extend the protected area where the monarch butterflies overwinter. They created the monarch butterfly biosphere reserve.
When I think about visiting the wintering grounds of the monarch butterfly, the thing that comes to mind first are the people. And when you visit the sanctuaries in the monarch butterfly biosphere reserve, you're visiting the homeland of people who are caring for these creatures. So for me, that's the face of the butterflies are the people who live in this place, who protect them.
Every little part of the migration is crucial. The monarch's migration is not a lone journey, but a series of interactions between the butterflies and the people and places they encounter. The life cycle of the monarch butterfly includes a metamorphosis, one of nature's most unique transformations.
To understand monarch butterfly migration, it's really important to understand the development of this butterfly because it goes through what's called metamorphosis. Adult butterflies lay eggs, and they lay their eggs on the milkweed plant. And those eggs develop into caterpillars. And those caterpillars, their primary job is to eat as much as possible, but they only eat one plant, and that plant is milkweed. So then they become a chrysalis, and then they metamorphose. Their cells literally go into a goo, and then they rebuild into another organism, the adult phase of a butterfly. That butterfly hatches, and then it's in its adult phase.
Access to milkweed is the most important part of the monarch life cycle. It's where the next generation will begin, ensuring the continuation of the species. As the monarchs navigate the vast landscapes of North America, their presence reminds us of the importance of our actions and their effects on the natural world. As we look deeper into the monarch story, we meet the reality of the threats they face. Their habitat, once covered in milkweed and wildflowers, has been transformed by many factors.
And so the biggest concern in the wintering grounds is trying to combat illegal timber harvesting. Preserving the monarch butterfly migration is looking at the actual pathway that butterfly takes across the journey from spring into summer into fall through the United States. Being able to reduce the amount of insecticides that we use in our farmlands is going to be a huge strategy to be able to make sure that monarch butterflies can persist.
The monarch's habitat is an essential part of their life cycle. The loss of milkweed due to agricultural practices are extremely dangerous to the butterflies.
These monarch butterflies are confronting many threats. First is milkweed extinction or depletion. There has been a lot of urban expansion and agricultural expansion. So they've been using, of course, herbicides, pesticides, and that impacts all of the plants, including the milkweed. And monarchs depend on milkweed to reproduce. And unfortunately, we learned that as we are producing more agricultural goods and as we are expanding our urban areas, we are killing those milkweeds.
The monarch butterfly's journey, filled with many potential problems, crosses much of North America.
Being able to ensure that milkweed and other nectar plant species are available throughout the entire range of the monarch butterfly, those are going to be the strategies that we need to put in place to make sure that this amazing phenomena is here to stay.
On their 2,500-mile journey, monarchs navigate through many obstacles, such as environmental hazards, shrinking breeding grounds, and the loss of milkweed due to pesticides.
And if we don't do it quickly, and if we don't do it now, we're going to continue to see the trend of the monarch butterfly, the migratory monarch butterfly, falling and decreasing in population.
So there's many factors, related to a changing climate that influences monarchs. The temperature and weather patterns will influence, how quickly they move and what happens to them. So if it's like colder, if it's a colder than normal year, it might take them longer to develop that first generation. But then if it's too warm, they might move too far north too soon, which would also, delay their development.
The journey that the monarch butterflies undertake is unique. These little guys weigh no more than 1 ounce, and yet they can travel up to 3,000 miles. These guys are not going to complete the migration back. They just go back after the winter, they go back to the United States, they look for milkweed where they're going to put the eggs, they die, and the next generation is going to continue.
This unique cycle crosses many generations and ensures the monarch butterfly continues to prosper. We are reminded that their survival is directly linked to our actions and the health of our shared planet. The monarch's flight is not just a natural wonder, but a powerful motivation for change, driving us to protect and participate in the conservation of our world's biodiversity. The process to preserve the monarch butterfly's legacy is more than a mission, it's a movement. Across their range, individuals and organizations are working together to solidify the future of these incredible creatures.
Everywhere along the route of the monarch butterfly that it exists throughout its life cycle, there are incredible people doing amazing work to be able to help conserve habitat that they rely upon and to be able to ensure that this migration exists in the future.
Each action taken to protect the monarchs impacts their migratory path. As we witness their numbers rise and fall, our commitment to their cause must remain constant. Across the vast landscapes these butterflies travel through, humans have come to help and interact with these creatures with a sense of empathy and urgency. This interaction is a display of our ability for conservation and compassion towards even the smallest of creatures.
I have the opportunity throughout the year to be able to guide people on wildlife tours throughout North America. And one of the trips that I'm able to guide is actually to the wintering grounds of the monarch butterfly.
A massive community of caretakers and conservationists has formed across North America to support the migratory monarch.
When you work with a species as charismatic as the monarch butterfly, is this not difficult to engage people? This is an insect that you can see in your backyard here in the United States, but you can also see it in Mexico and you can also see it in Canada.
Both the caretakers and the butterflies transcend borders across North America. People all over the continent are creating safe habitat spaces for these butterflies. The monarch's journey has become a shared one, with their fate linked to our individual and collective environmental actions. Let the monarch's journey be our example for a future where each little thing can inspire a human to act, to protect, and to support. The conservation of the monarchs is a call to action for everyone to help protect their future. our efforts are crucial to the species' survival.
In the United States, you can do a lot. You can stop using herbicides, you can stop using pesticides or fertilizers. All those chemicals are gonna end in the soil, are gonna kill all the plants, but also gonna kill the milkweed.
Monarch Watch heads the Monarch Way Station program, so that's where we've got some guidance on milkweed plants to include and nectar plants, and you can register your way station. You could help in your community to create a way station at a library or a school or other community types of locations.
Creating monarch way stations, curbing pesticide use, and fostering native plant growth are just a few ways we can contribute to the survival of the monarch butterfly. The story of the monarch butterfly is not complete. It is still being affected by the actions we take and the efforts we make every day.
We're learning things that we never thought was possible. And the monarch butterfly is this beautiful example of a species that is preposterous, this half-gram animal traveling 2,500 miles to a place it's never been before, but its great ancestor has been to the exact tree that it's going to end up. When we think about the monarch butterfly, it is a charismatic species. And that captures the imagination of people. It inspires people to action. We as people can come together across boundaries, across neighborhoods and cities and countries, and we can take care of the species that we live alongside in this one earth, this one home.
The monarch story inspires people across North America to help these butterflies continue to thrive in their annual migration.
My advice would be to go out there, enjoy nature, and see what you can do. There is a lot to do. Everything that we do in our life has an impact in this planet. From the things that we buy, from the food that we eat, how we transport ourselves, but also what we do outside. Do we trash? Are we, looking into using natural compost instead of fertilizers? What can we do is very important. Question yourself and make sure that every action that you do impacts in a positive way, not only for the planet, but for your loved ones. It's for us, it's for the humanity.
Every garden planted, every pesticide not sprayed, and every voice raised in advocacy helps the monarchs continue to prosper. From Canada to Mexico, we can all share the migratory monarch butterfly experience. Their successes represent our shared actions and efforts towards conservation and environmentalism. As we move forward, let the monarch be an example to the conservation and future for other species. Their journey reminds us that hope is a choice we can make every day.
Well, thanks you too. That was such a fantastic film, Mason. Wow. I know I'm feeling inspired. I want to get down there myself. But Charlie, I would love to throw it over to you.
Thank you, Brooke. And Mason, thanks for sharing your film and spending some time to talk about it today. You know,
Yeah.
this topic obviously is near and dear to my heart. And we've got a few questions for you. And folks that are listening right now, if as we're going through these questions, if you have your own questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And at the end, we'll take a look at those as well. But just to get us started, Mason, introduce yourself. Tell us where you're calling in from, and tell us
Yeah.
how'd you get into filmmaking.
Yeah. So I'm Mason. I'm a ninth grade student. I'm originally from Washington, D.C., but I'm currently living in Switzerland. And so I would say I first got interested in filmmaking probably when I was like 7 or 8 years old, playing around with apps on my iPad like iMovie and Stop Motion Studio. My first real film where I got more serious and did a full production was a short nature documentary. I went to a local like park, and I just filmed all the animals I saw. And when I got home, I did research on all of them, and my dad taught me the basics of Final Cut Pro, and I was able to kind of put together this short little nature documentary. And I think that sparked my interest in filmmaking.
Very cool. And I mean, so it was from the first film that you ever did that you had a nature focus. Like,
Yeah.
what drove you to be interested in that? Why
Yeah.
conservation?
So my dad works at the World Wildlife Fund, so I would say that that played a big part in it. I also went to an elementary school that was very eco-conscious. It was very green. They really taught us a lot about the environment, and I would say that also affected me a lot and pushed me towards making films on those topics. Um, and yeah, I think now that I've gained a lot more experience in making this kind of film, I I would like to keep sticking with the topic. I really enjoy it.
That's really exciting. And I know you're kind of what films you've done, and I've followed your film career. But tell the viewers a little bit
Yeah.
about the different issues that you've covered since starting
Yeah.
to get into this.
So this was my most recent film about the monarch migration. The one before that was actually on my elementary school, which is in Northern Virginia, and it was talking about all the different ways that they incorporated environmentalism into education. And the one before that was 3 years ago and that one was about Bristol Bay in Alaska and the proposed pebble mine. Um, and before that, I've made a couple, some deviated off of the environmentalism topic, but those have been my three most recent ones. Yeah.
Awesome. And I think there's so many conservation issues out there, right? And it strikes
Yeah.
me that with the monarch butterfly conservation in particular, it's an interesting story because it's one where individuals can play such a big part. Like especially in North America and the United States, we can plant milkweed the way that you talk about in the film. We can plant milkweed. We can buy products that haven't used herbicide and pesticide. We can support farmers who are doing practices that promote, different monarch butterfly as well as other pollinator habitat. But so I could kind of see that playing into maybe why you would want to tell this
Yeah.
story. But for you, when you're looking at all these different issues, how do you pick what you're going to focus on for your film?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so usually I try to keep up with the news so that I have an idea of kind of what environmental issues are kind of like pressing today. And I look for something that I feel like I can turn into a really good story. Um, Something that I feel like has modern day relevance and something where I can find information and footage and that sort of thing. So usually I do like a bit of research into the topic so I can get an idea of what the storyline would be like. And then typically I will find an expert that I think I can interview to get like a lot more information, try to help that shape the story, and yeah, and see just how I can make it into the best, like most intriguing film and story possible.
Yeah, I noticed. I mean, in this film, you kind of bookend the film by doing it your own narration of the story, and I
Yeah.
thought you did such a nice job of prepping the viewer for the information they were about to
Yeah.
receive. Do you
Mhm.
often write that once you've kind of edited things down, and then you figure out how do I tie all this together, or what's your process there for writing the script?
Yeah, so like for my narrations, those are usually some of the last things I put in. So like after I've done all of my interviews and I know the order that everything's going to be in, I use them if I like need to add in a bit of information or if I need to bridge like two ideas between each other. And yeah, that's one of the last things that I do is make sure that I have the narrations in there.
Yeah. And it sounds like, environmental issues are important to you, and you do some research to kind of pick your topic that you'll then tell a specific story about. And for you on this one, we got to sit down and like this and talk about monarch butterfly migration, and that was really fun for me. But coming into that conversation, how much have you kind of are you learning for the first time in that conversation and that spurs research, or have you done a lot of research ahead and you kind of know what I'm saying and you're guiding me through questions? I'm just curious about your process for how you go through that.
Yeah, so usually I do not know very much about the topic. Usually I do like a little bit of background research to make sure I know who to interview, what kind of questions to ask, but like most of my knowledge comes from the interviews themselves. Yeah.
Interesting.
Um,
Was there anything from the monarch butterfly story that was really surprising for you or that you didn't expect
um,
as you started looking at it?
so I mean, I didn't know the scale of the migration. Honestly, I really did not know that it was so large. And I didn't know that it was like you talked about how the butterflies can end up like in the same exact area that their ancestors were, and that was something that it was like almost unbelievable. I didn't expect that at all, and I hadn't done very much background research, so that was like a real surprise for me.
I mean, that for me, when I learned that I was going to be guiding this trip, I knew a
Hmm.
lot about monarch butterflies, but I obviously needed to do a ton of research to get
Yeah.
ready to go and guide. And that blew my mind too. I feel like everything about monarch butterflies, you learn a little bit more, you start to dive into their ecology. And this is usually for the natural world. I think it's a rule of thumb that the more we learn, the more surprises are embedded
Yeah.
in
Mhm.
what we learn. But I think monarch butterflies in particular, we still don't fully understand
Right.
how the fifth generation that's migrating south even ends up anywhere near where their ancestors were, let alone the similar patch of trees. It's mind boggling.
Yeah. Mhm.
So yeah, I can totally see how that would be a surprising piece of discovery. Um, so tell me a little bit more about kind of your process. I mean, you're taking footage
Yeah.
from, you know, collecting footage from a lot of different sources.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure you have hours
Yeah.
and hours of content to pull from. How are
Yeah.
you sifting through that and
Mhm.
creating what you end up to, you told a very cohesive story with really nice visuals. How do you get there?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, it's a very long process. I would say the largest amount of that process is in editing. I obviously plan the film ahead of time. I do the interviews. I would say finding footage and editing the footage takes the most amount of time. I have a couple of sources where I go back for B-roll. Like I use the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for a lot of B-roll on like my last couple films. I use like online free to use footage a lot. Sometimes I use footage from WWF or from my dad when he does trips, um, which helps when you like kind of know where you can get footage from. But
Yeah,
it's still a very long process to choose exactly the best clip for what part of the film, and then edit it down and like time it with the music and everything. It does take a while. Yeah.
yeah. Are you ever concerned? It was pretty cool watching your Pebble Mine film because you were able to put that film out right at a really crucial moment
Yeah.
where there was a lot of legislation to decide, like, are we
Yeah.
actually going to go through with this?
Hmm.
Are you ever concerned that the process of filmmaking takes so long? Like, what if you get to the end of it and
Yeah.
the story, are you thinking about that and how you write the script to try and make it timeless, or are you just kind of like, it's a great story, I'm gonna do it?
I try as best I can to not do anything that's like anything too time specific. It's always challenging when like new information is popping up. I think nothing too big happened for the Monarch film, but the Pebble Mine was definitely different in that way, which was it was not as good that it was less. It was not as well up to date. Very soon after the film was created.
Right.
But yeah, yeah,
But in a good direction where your film
yeah.
just kind of telling the story of, or do you want to speak a little bit to that
Yeah,
film of just what it's about and kind of talk a little bit about how it came out and then
yeah,
what the
sure.
outcome was?
Yeah, so my film, Pebble Mine, was about 3 years ago, about the proposed Pebble Mine in Alaska. And it was, I believe, like the largest copper and gold mine. Was it in the world? Was it in North? I think in North America,
At least that, yeah.
at least in North America. I haven't refreshed myself much on it recently, but it was going to be like detrimental to the Alaskan wildlife and the native people living there. Um, and a lot of stuff came out right as I was ending the film and right after. I haven't done a lot of thorough research into it. Are you more familiar with that?
The last, I
In my
think the
legislation?
last legislation there was basically that it's not going to move forward. But just
That's
like anything, another proposal can come back to put it back on the
of
plate. So
course.
it
Okay.
remains relevant. So
Of
I
course.
just
Yeah.
think it's got to be a challenge with filmmaking of, and I thought with the Monarch Butterfly story, everything that was told there is going to remain true forever because
Yeah.
those
Mhm.
are the resources the butterfly is going to depend upon on its migratory
Right.
route
Mhm.
throughout its whole life. And I think I really liked that you ended with a message of hope.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
is was that something that you decided by interviewing people, or was it something that you decided that you just from a creative standpoint wanted to end on an uplifting
Yeah,
side?
I think that I had already kind of decided before conducting the interviews that that's kind of how I wanted it to go. I believe some of my questions and like prompts in the conversation were like, why do you have hope for the future?
Yeah,
Do you have any message for the end? So that I could structure the film in that way. Yeah.
yeah. I think that was really nice. And in the case of the monarch butterflies, personally, I do think that there is a good amount of hope. I think,
Yeah.
like you read a lot of news, a lot of articles recently, like they're getting listed and that's
Mhm.
obviously that's kind of reflective of the fact that their populations are crashing. But at the same
Right.
time, it is this insect that has such resilience in terms of how quickly it can bounce back because they're
Yeah.
laying 400 eggs every time. And if
Mhm.
the circumstance is right for all of those eggs to develop into adults, you can have a population bounce back on a
Right.
really short time
Yeah.
frame. So I really do feel like that hopeful message in this story is really accurate to the
Yeah.
ecological story as well.
Mhm.
So you've done this film. What was the date that you released this? It was maybe this last fall or
Yeah,
summer
that sounds about right. Around
uh,
then.
to festivals and
Right.
so what are your goals with filmmaking as you look ahead?
That's a good question. So I plan to continue making them at least throughout high school. So I'm currently in ninth grade, so I should be releasing at least a couple more films. Um, I hope to improve a lot on my filmmaking skills, and I should be continuing with the topic of like environmentalism and wildlife. There are some things that I want to like work on and be improving. I definitely like to get more hands-on in the cinematography because I haven't done that very much, and I'm just pretty much at a beginner level with any sort of camera work or anything like that. So I think that would be a great thing for me to work on. So yeah, I hope to keep making a lot more films in the future.
That's great to hear, especially knowing that when you're making films about conservation, I really do think that that's one of the greatest ways because it's such a relatable medium. Like you get to see people's faces, you
Yeah.
get to see the actual thing, and I think for conservation, um, it's such a powerful method of trying to reach people.
Yeah.
Uh, and I know you're early in high school, ninth grade, but
Yeah.
thinking about what career does filmmaking fit in? What are you hoping to do once you at least
Yeah.
once you graduate high school? Where are you headed next?
Good question. I'm honestly not sure. I find myself to be like pulled in a lot of different directions. If filmmaking is an option, I'm not sure if it's my first choice. I think I'm more interested in like computer science and engineering and that sorts of things. But I definitely think no matter what I decide to do, I plan on keeping filmmaking as an interest and a hobby and hopefully continuing to make films for at least a while.
Very cool. Well, conservation community will benefit from it as long as you're involved. Uh,
Mm,
so thanks for answering my questions. I'd love to bring it
mm.
back to Brooke to be able to see if there's some questions from folks who are listening in right now.
Yeah, thanks both of you. That was very informative. I definitely appreciate hearing more of the backstory and the inspiration behind the film and everything. So first, we have some great questions that have come in, and everybody, we have some time for some Q&A. If you have questions about butterflies or filmmaking, we have two pros here, so it's a great opportunity. So, first, what type of milkweed, for those of us who might live in a butterfly area, what should we plant in our backyard or anywhere if we happen to be in the migration path?
Yeah, so this is a really great question, and in the film, so Mason, you interviewed folks from Monarch Watch, and
Mhm.
that's the number one place if you're thinking about trying to establish a monarch butterfly garden. Monarch Watch is the place to go. So it's monarchwatch.org, right, Mason?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, so if you go there, you can actually type in your address and then they will tell you here are the plants that you should plant, here are the local nurseries that you might be able to buy them from, or you can literally order them online and they'll deliver during the growing season
Mhm.
for those plants. One of the concerns is that um, it's important to plant what's local to you because different species of milkweed have different chemical compositions. And one of the things we didn't get into too much is that monarch butterflies they feed on milkweed in part because that plant is slightly toxic. And those toxins are absorbed into the tissue of the monarch butterfly, which makes them so that they have a defense against predators. If birds eat a monarch butterfly, they'll immediately feel sick and they'll regurgitate that meal, and it'll teach them that bright orange color is something that they should avoid. And so when you look at planting plants at home, if you plant something, typically if you go to nurseries are getting better at stocking local milkweed plants, but occasionally they'll be selling what's called a tropical milkweed. And tropical milkweed will grow in northern climates, but the toxicity level is lower. And that's actually sometimes bad for monarch butterflies for a couple of reasons. Because one of the reasons why the monarch butterflies are good with toxicity is that it prevents predation. But another problem that monarch butterflies face is a parasite, lots of different types of parasites. And if the monarch butterfly doesn't have enough of that toxicity in its body, it can become susceptible to parasites. And so there's some interesting interplays, but the bottom line is all milkweed is good milkweed, but it's best if you can find local milkweed plants. Mason, do you have anything to add to that?
No, you explained a lot. I didn't even know most of that. That was.
Actually, this is the perfect little lob up here for somebody else's question. And that is, have Mason, you, or I guess even Charlie, either of you, have you thought about doing a story about what you should not do? And this person was great and even included planting tropical milkweed or rearing monarchs yourself or anything like that. Has that been on the to-do list? What not to do for monarchs?
It's an interesting idea. I don't know if I would be make a whole film about that. Could have been a good thing to explain in the film itself, actually, in retrospect. But
I think it's
yeah.
tricky. It becomes tricky too because um, sometimes just the way our brains are wired, when you talk about things not to do, the thing that sticks in your brain is the thing that you talked about, not the
Mm,
message of
yeah.
not doing it. So a lot of times in environmental movements, we really focus on here's the thing we want you to do, because then that's what folks will remember and go home and put into action. But there are some nuances, and that's part of why both in Mason's film and in my explanation just now, Monarch Watch is the organization to go to. Like they have all of the information. And so if you go to that page as your direct source for how to engage and participate in this issue, you will be doing the best practice. And I think the other side too is that finger wagging is, and getting putting out the word that there are bad things that you can do is good, but conservation often butts up against this issue of finger wagging and kind of bleeding heart environmentalists saying no, 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 don't do that, and it often doesn't get received well by people who might be allies if we don't finger wag. So I think there's a place for both, but I think if we point people to the best source of information that's doing all the right stuff, that can be a really helpful way to make sure people are doing the right thing. But it is, you did mention in your question the idea of rearing butterflies to be released, and there is some data to suggest that depending on the species, depending on your location, that might not be a successful contributor to actual conservation efforts in a population of a species when it comes to butterflies and moths. But it does depend on the species, it depends on where you are. And on top of that, there's this balance, right, of the educational objective of what it's like to rear monarchs in a classroom, versus the possible detrimental environmental impact if those butterflies are released. And so a lot of classrooms that are doing kind of rearing butterflies in the classroom are doing it without releasing those butterflies into the wild. So they'll watch them grow, they'll observe the life cycle, and then those butterflies will not be released for any number of reasons, whether it's possible parasites or just the inability of that butterfly to get to where it needs to go. So a lot of considerations there, but that's a really good question.
Yes, thank you for bringing up the no finger wagging. That is exactly my same motto for my years of conservation storytelling. So I'm glad we're all on the same page. Great. So we have another great question here. Could you elaborate on the actual population size of the monarch butterflies that are in the wintering grounds in Mexico? How many are actually there that we go see on our trips?
You want me to take that one, Mason?
I think so, yeah.
All right. So this is a really complicated question because it's been really hard for the scientific community to estimate the actual population of monarch butterflies. So let's take a really, really big view of this species at first. We look at monarch butterflies. We believe that their population pre-human influence could have been as big as 1 billion butterflies, 1 billion, which is wild. Today, a good year, we would have, in terms of a migratory population of monarch butterflies, in the hundreds of millions of butterflies. But these are population estimates. And the way that we get our estimates are from a couple places. Monarch butterflies in the winter will congregate in a very, very small area of the forest in the high elevation mountains of Mexico, in central Mexico. And they're going there because they're seeking out a really kind of a Goldilocks zone of temperature where they can stay cool but not frozen, to be able to use as little energy as possible to be able to make it through the resource poor winter, so that then they can come back into North America in the spring and take advantage of all the resources that are available in terms of the diversity of milkweed species as well as the abundance of them. Now, you might be wondering how I'm getting to your question, but I'll get there. Um, Basically, the scientific community discovered the wintering grounds of the monarch butterfly in the 70s, 80s. So the scientific community was unaware that this phenomena was happening, but the local culture did know that it was happening already. People who lived in that area, the whole Day of the Dead celebration is around the return of the monarch butterfly. So the scientific community started studying the wintering grounds around that time, and in the 70s, 80s. And they congregate into an area, and the way that we estimate population is actually by the amount of physical space that they occupy in the winter. And we do that by aerial surveys, by flying planes and taking pictures and being able to see where the orange is located and how large of an area they occupy. The other thing that was really interesting is that there was one winter where in the mountains where the butterflies are located, it got incredibly cold and there was a big die off of monarch butterflies. And it was at the time where they were studying and trying to do a population survey of monarch butterflies. Imagine trying to estimate how many butterflies are on a single Oyamel fir tree when all of the branches that should be pointing up are pointing down because they're heavy with butterflies. You can't disturb them, you can't catch them, so you just have to come up with a number. So on this year where butterflies were killed because of this incredible cold weather event, the scientists went out and counted every dead butterfly on the ground, which helped them figure out a number of butterflies per hectare of forest. So, all that to say, even today, we're not very good at estimating the population of the monarch butterfly. We're extrapolating numbers based on how densely they occupy a particular section of forest, and then we're measuring how much of the forest they're occupying to be able to say, gosh, this year maybe we have 200 million, something like that. That's not currently what the population is, that's just a number. But this question becomes really important because if you're planning on going on a monarch butterfly trip, you will not know the difference if you visited today or if you visited 5 years ago or if you visited 10 years ago, even though the population has crashed in that period of time. And it's because there's this effect where you're going to go into a section of forest, it's going to be filled with monarch butterflies. It will feel like there are hundreds of thousands and millions in the air this year, last year, the year before. Even on a bad year for the monarch butterfly population, you would still have that experience. It's just that they're congregating in fewer areas because their population is lower. So it's a little bit of a false sense of security. You'll be able to have a great experience in the monarch butterfly grounds, but it takes a broader view and a bigger perspective to really understand that this is a major issue.
Yeah, thanks for that awesome explanation. Yeah, I'm very interested to see what happens with monarchs here soon. Hopefully, we'll have some updates from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, whether or not they're going to be listed. So, everybody keep an eye on that. Me, as a conservation biologist, I'm very, very interested in what's going to happen with our monarchs from a government level protection. Sometimes it takes the top down to get some things done, you know?
Right.
So next, let's see here. I'm actually getting lots of questions. People want to see more of your films, Mason. Where can people do that?
So I believe most of them are on YouTube right now under my channel, Mason Mirabile. Um, I think the Monarch one is not public there because when I submit it to festivals, a lot of times they don't want it to be publicly available on the internet. And I'm not sure if my one before that is public, my one on my elementary school, but all of my films previous of that are on there, and it's just my name with no space in between on YouTube.
Great, awesome. And everyone has spellings right there. So, okay, great. Oh, actually, Charlie, we have another question here. So, if you could expand a little further on that last question I just asked, could you explain the difference between the population densities in the wintering grounds versus the breeding grounds?
Hmm. Now think about that because the wintering grounds, just thinking about their biology, um, and we touched on this in in the in the film and in our conversation so far, but the monarch butterflies will spend all of winter in a very small area, and it's essentially kind of basically 15 to 20 areas in the Transvolcanic Mountains. And those areas are fairly close to each other geographically. So for this trip with Natural Habitat Adventures, you fly into Mexico City and you drive about 4 hours into the mountains, and you stay at a lodge, and then you take a truck up to an even higher location that gets up to like 10,000 feet in elevation, and then you hike from there to get to one of the locations that the butterflies congregate. The Monarch Butterfly Biosphere Reserve encompasses a huge geographic area. Within that, there are hot pockets where butterflies have spent the winter in recent years, going back to when the scientific community started studying them in the 80s and 90s. These locations are where the monarch butterflies are just going to hold that temperature, right? Like it's like 50, 60 degrees during the day. It gets down to maybe 40, sometimes colder at night. Monarch butterflies can't survive freezing, and they can't survive getting wet and then freezing. So these areas are kind of the perfect place where they can survive. They'll be there from about November 1st all the way until, mid end of March is when they're going to start thinking about migrating. The monarch butterflies, when they reach the end of that time, are going to come out of what's called reproductive diapause. So when they go on this big migratory journey, they go into reproductive diapause, where they shut down all of their reproductive organs, and they start to store more fat and carbohydrates to be able to power this gigantic migration down to this area. And so towards the end of that time period, you'll be in the wintering grounds. I was there the last week of February, first week of March 2 years ago. And during that time frame, there were butterflies that were mating. So they start to mate in their wintering grounds, and then eventually they'll start to migrate north. Some of them will continue to kind of travel together and mate on the way. Once the males have mated, that's their final act, and they will die. So that's they've used up all of their resources, and they actually, in mating, they provide what's called a spermatophore, which is this nutrient-packed thing that will power the flight of the female to get as far north as possible, in addition to fertilizing her egg. And so that helps to make sure that each generation is going further and further north, because North America, the United States geographically has so many more milkweed species and a much higher abundance. Like we were talking about that earlier. But the wintering grounds are the mating grounds, but it's kind of blurry because they'll continue to mate and have additional generations as they progress northward in their generational migration.
So not a straightforward question or answer. As is life and science in these things. That's why it's so fascinating what they do. So this is a really fun question. How did you two meet?
Yeah, I love that question. Mason, I'll take it at first, and then you'll fill in some detail. But so 2 years ago on that trip for Natural Habitat Adventures, I actually guided Mason's dad, who works for World Wildlife Fund. And from that, after that trip, Mason's dad connected us and asked me if I was interested in participating in the film by doing an interview, and from there we got introduced. But you can provide a little more context about the connection to World Wildlife Fund if you want, Mason.
Yeah, I mean, my dad introduced me to Charlie, and we did the interview, and I think it was great for the film, and yeah.
Then was your dad one of the big inspirations behind this, knowing that he went on this trip and was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, Mason, this would be an amazing topic for you."
Yeah, I think that was the main catalyst for this film idea.
Well, and it was really fun on the trip too because Mason's dad is an incredible photographer and videographer, and so some of the footage that Mason had in his film is from his dad. Some of it's from me. Some of it's from
Yeah,
other people. But his dad took some amazing slow motion footage of the butterflies in the monarch butterfly grounds.
yeah.
Yeah.
How cool. We did just get a last comment in here that we have someone listening who went on the trip and that they highly recommend beautiful monarchs and great guacamole. Sounds amazing.
Go for the monarch, stay for the guacamole.
Yes, I'm sure the margaritas are good too. Awesome. Well, I want to thank you both. And so I will turn it to you for any last closing comments, Mason and Charlie.
Well, Mason, thank you so much for doing this, and it's a really uh, fun. It's really fun to see someone so young who is making such a big impact, and that
Mhm.
just your mission to do a film a year while you're in high school is really exciting. I can't wait to see what you do next. So
Yeah,
thank you for taking the time to talk with us today.
yeah. Thank you so much for you guys for having me on. This is great.
All right.
Yes,
Excellent,
and
Brooke.
yes, and thank you, Mason. You've actually helped us kick off some additional film premieres we will be doing on Daily Dose. So thank you for being the first one and really planting the seed, literally and figuratively, for this fantastic idea and sharing your beautiful work with us. So, and again, thank you, Charlie, for being a great host today. That was awesome. And I would like to thank everybody who tuned in. Join us Monday for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out next week's lineup, including registration links on our website at nathab.com/webinars. And keep an eye out for our Sunday e-news announcement. We did record the presentation and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.